Boom family, it's Gerlisa, and it is finally almost time for Christmas, which is a joyous time of the year, not only to spend time with family, but to rest and to reset and get ready for the next year. Also, in December, Christmas is the time where we celebrate Jesus' birthday. And we all know that Jesus was the new kid on the block around this time, and a lot of people wasn't feeling it, and a lot of people were. Some knew that he was going to be a miracle worker and a redeemer, and he was going to change lives, but others also didn't understand his purpose or his calling. And so as we celebrate Christmas this year, I want you guys to think about how Jesus will always come in and show up as we go through changes in life. So there's going to be a lot of new things that's going to happen, and there's going to be changes that may come and things that may go. But Jesus is always faithful, and he is always consistent in his love for us. So as our ministry partners go deeper, I hope and pray that you take notes and that your minds are open and your hearts are open, ready to receive what he has for you. Stay tuned.
Okay, first things first. Merry Christmas! Okay, I know I'm a little early, but I don't care. Christmas is close enough to be merry. Now, when I was growing up, I lived in a neighborhood with a bunch of kids, and we used to all hang out and have fun together, and we were such a close-knit group of friends. And then all of a sudden, one year, we had new neighbors show up, and they had kids too, and we were like, are they gonna be okay and cool hanging out with us? Are they fun like we are? And eventually we got to know them, and it was the best thing ever. And we're still friends today. Now you probably know what this situation is like. Most of us have had a new person show up in our life and had everything change because of it. Like maybe your class got a new teacher in the middle of the year, and it just wasn't as much fun as it used to be. Maybe you had a new kid show up to school and it was all anyone could talk about for like a week. Maybe your family got a new addition, like a sibling or someone moving in with you, and your home dynamic shifted a bit. Maybe you play sports and you got a new coach and you are so grateful that things got better. Maybe someone new joined your friend group, and at first you were nervous, but now you are so happy that they're there. We know what it's like for a new person to show up and for everything to change. Sometimes changes are for good. Sometimes they're for bad. Sometimes it's neither. It's just a little different. As we're jumping into the holiday season, barreling toward Christmas, this season is all about celebrating someone new showing up in the neighborhood, Jesus. And I know that Christmas might not feel like it's celebrating someone new, because from our perspective, we've always had Jesus. But back when he was born, Jesus really shook things up. And that is what we're going to be talking about in this series. While we might not like to admit it, many of us don't always love change. We like to keep things the same because change can come with uncertainty and unknowns. It can make us feel uncomfortable because what if the change we're going to get makes things worse? No one would choose that. So we get pretty comfortable with the way things are. And when we are faced with change, we try to keep change within our control. Like, how many of you see people at Christmas that you usually don't see otherwise? You know, the uncle or aunt that you only see at the holidays. I don't know about you, but when that happens at my house, if I'm being totally honest, sometimes I think, oh, this is why I don't hang out with you all year. Because when people come together from all over the place and bring different beliefs and different thoughts to the same table, it changes things. We start to feel tensions that maybe weren't there before, and we don't always like it. Or maybe you have that friend that you would be hesitant to bring around your family. They just act so different than your family does, or they are always cracking jokes that you definitely don't want them to say in front of your parents or caretakers. I mean, what if that friend showed up to your house on Christmas morning? Can you imagine what that would be like? Your heart would probably sink in your stomach because you aren't sure how they're gonna act or what they're going to say. You would probably be on guard the whole time, nervous that things aren't going to go like you thought. We all have expectations for how Christmas is going to go, or at least how we would like for it to go. But when someone new shows up to the party, it can change the whole experience. And while we don't like change at Christmas, when we might get nervous with someone new, I'm willing to bet that most of us don't like change of any kind. And that means we don't like change when it comes to God. We have an idea of exactly how things should go. But what happens when they don't go that way? What happens when our expectations aren't met? What happens when God doesn't do what we think He should? For many of us, we start to approach God differently. Like, we used to pray all the time, but God didn't answer a certain prayer. So we start to believe that God either can't or won't do anything. And then we give up on it. We lose interest in anything faith-related because we think that God seems distant or far away or is just uncaring. We read about God in the Bible and see all the things He did back then, but what about now? We assume that God's unable to do anything big or powerful anymore. Or maybe we think God is just uninterested. Maybe God doesn't know or even care about anything in our lives. So why bother telling God about our lives or expecting Him to do anything? We don't always do it on purpose. We usually just kind of become this way because it feels like things have changed. We learn one way of walking with Jesus, one way of having a relationship with God, but then our expectations with Him slowly change because it feels like they have to. But what if they don't? What if when Jesus moved into the neighborhood, we gained an opportunity to find a new way to live? What if by looking to Jesus in our lives today, we can find a healthier, better, happier way to walk with God? The good news is we aren't the first ones to feel like God is shaking things up for us. In fact, the Christmas story, the story we are celebrating for the next couple of weeks, changed everything for people that were living back then too. It was way different than anything they were expecting. That may sound strange to us because the story may be so familiar. I mean, to imagine it going any different would be weird. But the truth is, when Jesus moved into the neighborhood 2,000 years ago, people were imagining God would send His Son in a very different way than He did. But before we go any further, let's get a refresher on the details of the Christmas story itself. Mary, the mother of Jesus, was a young, pregnant Jewish teenager and not yet married. She and Joseph, the man she was engaged to be married to, didn't have a lot of money and were living in a land occupied by the Roman Empire. And at the start of the story, the Roman government decided they wanted to have a count of all the people they were ruling. So, every family was told to go to the town they were originally from to be counted. That meant Mary, who was pregnant, had to get on a donkey for an uncomfortable and miserable trip to Bethlehem, where Joseph's family came from. Sounds awful, right? But wait, there's more. Once they got to Bethlehem, all the hotels are full. Our guy Joseph forgot to book an Airbnb or jump on Hopper. Not only is Mary super pregnant and tired and uncomfortable, but now she also has nowhere to sleep. And then, since there wasn't enough going wrong already, Mary goes into labor, as in the baby is coming. Here, now, in Bethlehem, far away from their home, with no bed to sleep in or have a baby in. Now, I know things were different 2,000 years ago. I know there was a different culture for that time and place, but I can promise you this. It doesn't matter what culture you are from or what time you are living in. This situation is, how do you say it? Not ideal. Actually, it stinks. No, I mean literally stinks, because Joseph's desperation to find a place for Mary to have this baby, the only thing available was a stable, which was basically a cave where farm animals were kept. So she is trying to have a baby while a donkey is munching on hay right next to her. I mean, can you imagine it? And that's where they ended up. That's where Mary had her child, away from her family, away from her home, away from anything comfortable. She had her baby, just her and Joseph, completely alone, and no one expected it. In fact, If I had been Mary or Joseph, I can only imagine what would have been running through my mind. I probably would have thought that God is distant. God must be mad at us. God has forgotten us. God is punishing us. God has abandoned us. God is silent. Because if God doesn't do what we think he should, if God doesn't behave like we expect him to, if God doesn't just show us what he is like, then maybe it just makes sense to try to figure it out on our own. And if this is how things are going, then maybe God really isn't that great. Chances are, there were a lot of people who already thought those things about God long before he sent his son to be born in a manger. Because for hundreds of years, he had been silent. There were no prophets with messages from God to hear. They had been waiting on God to show up, waiting on God to rescue them for a really long time. And it was probably really easy to give up hope. There was no sign of being freed from the empire that ruled them. There was no indication God even cared about them anymore, let alone that God was doing anything. By all appearances, God was nowhere to be found. And everyone thought they knew exactly what God was like. They thought that God was powerful, like a military leader taking the land back. God was obvious, showing up in a palace or in a wealthy family. God was predictable, doing what the people wanted if they followed the rules. God was exactly like they expected him to be, arriving as they thought and with messages they wanted to hear. But for all the expectations they had of God, it turns out they missed the one that mattered most. It wasn't that God had let them down, which would have made him undependable or weak or not worth following. No, they missed who God really was, and they expected something completely different than who God had always been. And who was God? What was God like? Everyone was about to find out. John, who was a close friend of Jesus and recorded the life of Jesus in what we now call the book of John, describes it like this. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. We saw the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. The Word, that's Jesus. John calls him that because he is God's Word in human form. The word meant that Jesus was the very nature, will, and way of God in human form. And when Mary gave birth, that meant God was moving into our neighborhood, in our world, as a real human being, just like you and like me. And the best part about it, Jesus showed us exactly what God was like Father, like Son. This means we don't have to wonder anymore. We don't have to question what things should be like. He was here, and he started to reveal to us everything that God wanted us to know about him. Now, everyone was surprised because they expected a warrior, a ruler, a punisher of enemies, a king, or at least someone to take charge. But instead, they got a baby. So naturally, they were disappointed. This was not what they were expecting. But the truth is, in Jesus, they got something far better than anything they could have expected. They got a God who was with them, not in some palace, but in their neighborhood. And that's significant. That means God wasn't an out-of-reach ruler. God showed he was an accessible and reachable God. Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples who wrote the book of Matthew, calls him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And God with us, as a little baby, that idea changes everything. God with us means no matter what, we are never alone. No matter our behavior, no matter our good days or our bad days, no matter our family situation or our financial status, no matter what we've done that we're either proud of or embarrassed of. People back then didn't have to wonder anymore what God was like. Jesus would show them. And it's the same for us today. We don't have to wonder if God is there, or wonder if God is present, or wonder if God cares. We can know that God cares because God showed up. In the middle of a mess, in the lowliest of situations, he chose to be with us. And because God chose to be with us, we can live in a new way, following the example of Jesus. Think about it like this. When Jesus moved into the neighborhood, we received a new way of life. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It started with Christmas, but it continues to be true because Jesus died on the cross, rose from the grave, and sends his Holy Spirit to be with us forever. In other words, when we follow Jesus, the Spirit of God lives in us and helps live out a new way of life. So, what does this new way of life mean for us today? How does it impact our everyday lives? First, it means we can know that Jesus is everything God says. When John describes Jesus as the Word becoming flesh and blood, it means that Jesus exemplifies in human form everything God wants us to know. And since we have Jesus' example of how to live life the best way possible, we don't have to hold grudges anymore. Jesus forgave us, so we can forgive others too. We don't have to wonder if God actually loves us. He showed us that through Jesus. We don't have to wonder if God is actually present. He showed that he's with us. We don't have to wonder if we have worth or value. Jesus showed us that we do by dying for us. We don't have to wonder how we are designed to live. Jesus came and gave an example. Think about that. We were designed to live this new way of life. And in life, we know that things are best when they fit their design. Take the spoon, for example. What do we use a spoon for? This isn't a trick question. It's for eating. My favorite thing to eat with a spoon? Ice cream. This little spoon helps me get the perfect scoop for the perfect bite. But have you ever tried using a spoon to eat a sandwich? It's not an enjoyable experience, no matter how soft the bread is on the sandwich may be. Of course not, because a spoon wasn't designed to cut through a sandwich. Or take your clothes as another example. Can you imagine trying to get dressed wearing your shorts as a shirt? Or in sports, imagine playing soccer with a bowling ball. 8 broken toes later, you'll realize it's not designed for that. Things are best when they fit their design. And what God shows us through Jesus is that you were designed for a new way of life. And the best experience you'll find in life is when you live within that design. And Jesus gives us the example of what it looks like. In other words, we have a new way of life and we don't have to do it alone. That is what Christmas is all about. That's why we are celebrating, because Jesus changed everything. But this is a type of change we don't have to fear. We don't have to be uncomfortable with this change. We can know that the change that Jesus brought is the best change that has ever happened. It's what allows us to live how God designed. Jesus changed the way we saw God. He gave us a new way to understand God and relate to him. And that is good news. So, how can we continue to step into this new way of life? It starts with knowing that it's available to you. So, find one way this week to keep reminding yourself of what Jesus is like, to remind yourself that he is kind, loving, forgiving, good, and so much more. Maybe it's writing a note in your phone and committing to reading it every day, or asking a small group leader or trusted friend or adult to help remind you, or maybe you can be a part of reminding someone else. Christmas is the best time to examine the way we see God, ourselves, and the people around us, and to recognize that Jesus changes everything. It's a great time to remember that Jesus' example can impact the way we live every day of our lives. The God of the universe came down to earth to show us that he loves us, to show us that he cares about us, and to show us a new way to live.
I hope that this was good for you and that you took a lot of notes. As we prepare for the holidays, I pray that you guys have safe travels and that you spend a lot of quality time with your loved ones, and that you welcome the new changes in your life with open arms.